Do you know what Marian Pahaza's nickname was?
No, go on.
The Latvian Michael Owen.
Yeah.
So I think Michael Owen's nickname should be the English Marian Pahaz.
My mate, who was a big Southampton fan, whenever he mentioned Pahaz, he'd do it in the style of Alan Partridge. Pahaz! I remember there was a big thing about him being a man called Marion, wasn't there?
There were loads of footballers around this era. There was Beattie, there was Edie, there was Flo. It's just old woman names in the Premier League. And of course, Hernan Crespo.
Hello and welcome to the last in the current series of When Football Began Again, the podcast that bathes in the tranquil waters of Premier League past. Today's show reunites two guests who were on my first ever episode. Marv Dickinson and James Cook are joining me again. Last time we were discussing 92-93. Today it's 98-99. A good season by any standard, especially if you're a Manchester United fan and perhaps less so a Villa fan in their cases. More from them in a moment. Before we do that, thank you as ever for all of your support of the show. A lovely reaction to last week's show, which was all about Manchester United's treble winning season. We kind of discuss other things today, although there are a few other themes as we reach that 25-year point. Beckham comes up a lot. There's the Di Canio push. There's the title race going right down to the wire. David Unsworth's brief stint at Aston Villa and how that all ended in tears. That and so much more. It's a really, really fun episode. Lots of trivia, lots of anecdotes. I think you're going to really enjoy it. It's a great one to end this series on. I will be telling you more about plans for the next season, season 4 of this show at the end, so do hang around for that. Also, you will also find out there how you can vote for your Premier League greatest Cameroonian. The lads discussed that today as well, but let's crack on with it. Today's show with Marvin Dickinson and James Cook, all about 98-99. Enjoy. Today's show is a continuation of our season by season reviews. We're up to 98-99, and joining me today are two guests who made their debuts on the show in our pilot episode all the way back in 92-93. We have reached the end of the decade. It's Marv Dickinson and James Cook. Hello, gents. You okay?
Morning.
It was so long ago that we did the pilot that it feels like it was in 1993.
Was it not?
Quite a bit of water under the bridge in for the Premier League and clearly for both of our guests as well. Marv, we'll start with you. What was going on for you in 1998, the summer of 1998?
Right, okay. Summer of absolute turmoil, Carl, to be honest. You know, Beckham thought he had a crap summer after giving Simeone a little dig there. But I just completely fucked up my degree, basically. I'd completed my degree minus a dissertation.
Right, okay.
So that's an oxymoron or whatever that is, isn't it? It's because I've literally not completed it, have I? So, yeah, I was minus the honours. So I was but I did get lucky, Carl. I got lucky because I did sports science and I was invited back in the September of 98 to start helping with some postgraduate sort of like research that the university were doing in conjunction with the FA and Umbro on the 1998 World Cup.
Oh, wow. Well, that's a touch.
Yeah, so it turned into a right touch, yeah. Met illustrious people from the FA like Kenny Swain, who was part of the youth setup, and was introduced to him by one of the lecturers at university as Malcolm. So that was a great moment. Yeah, so Kenny Swain thinks that bloke he met back in 98, the young lad who fucked up his degree, was a young lad called Malcolm. So that was my life at the time.
Can you almost hear that in the background? Is there like it almost sounds like a bin lorry?
Yeah, there's a bin lorry outside my house.
It's literally a bin lorry, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's quite a problem though that a bin lorry turns up whilst we're talking about my degree, James, to be honest.
Is it really loud?
It's gone quiet now. That's fine. And James, the same question to you. Summer of 1998. We left you in May 1993 last time on the show. What's happening in the world of James Cook?
I had just finished my degree, which I didn't get a great degree. But the start of this season, I was in Edinburgh for the Edinburgh Fringe Festival in 1998 as a fresh-faced 21-year-old, doing gigs, hanging out, I had two friends in Edinburgh. They both had mental breakdowns. I'm trying not to take that personally. And then I moved back to my back in with my parents in Solihull after that, as I desperately tried to work out what I wanted to do. And then basically in this season, I was in Edinburgh, and then I was in Solihull with my parents, and then I moved to London in the January, and then moved out again in the March and moved back to Solihull because that did not work. And so I was, I was in that sort of post-university limbo of, oh no, I've got to figure out what I'm going to do now. And it took me a long time to realize that I wasn't actually going back to university. In fact, I only just realized that now in 2024.
James, you're right. It is a difficult time. I mean, we're going to talk about the 98-99 season eventually, but I think it's suddenly becoming a podcast episode about dealing with leaving university.
Yeah,
I think that's what the listeners really want. I was actually working that summer. I'd left university at my mum's place where she worked, at a place called Askew's in Preston, which was a library book supplier. So they get the books and they prepare the books for library use.
Okay.
And you can get through that, Carl, when you're going back to Liverpool John Moores in September.
Yeah.
But it's much more difficult to get through when you know you've got nothing. I mean, obviously Kenny Swain did come through in the end, but it was a difficult time.
Yeah.
Is there a player that either of your teams almost signed but didn't, that would have gone on to become a club legend? Or conversely, is there any players that you were linked with that you were pleased that you swerved?
All the players Villa got linked with that we bought that I hoped we'd swerved was players we ended up signing. There was a rumour after he had not exactly set the world alight at Manchester United, and we often were there for Manchester United cast-offs. There was a rumour in the early 2000s that Aston Villa were going to sign Diego Forlan, which I really, really wanted to happen because that would have made our front line Forlan Angel.
Perfect.
Pun-based transfer rumours. That's what we're here for.
That's why I always wanted just to sign Owen Hargreaves as well, because then our midfield would have been Barry Hargreaves, who is the male ballroom dancer from Heidi High.
Amazing.
Marv, I mean, Man United linked with many players over the years.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. For some reason, I just thought of, it's nothing to do with the question you're asking, but because we're talking about puns on names, Jeff Horsfield, who used to play up front for Birmingham, I've got no idea why he didn't just change his name to Jeff Forcefield. I mean, it was already nearly there, wasn't it? That's by the by.
He'd been better in defence.
Exactly.
I've met Jeff Horsfield, and annoyingly, as a Villa fan, he's really nice.
Well, he did spend a lot of time in the lower leagues, didn't he? I think it maybe adds a humility to the man. And he's called Jeff. He's got to have humility, isn't he?
Yeah.
So anyway, moving on from the lovely Jeff Forcefield / Horsfield / centre half / centre forward. I think David Hurst might tick both boxes, Ferguson wanted him so badly for so long. And I think there's a story that when he didn't get Shearer from Southampton, he went in all in with a massive bid in 92 for him, and Francis turned it down. But then just after that happened, we signed Cantona, and David Hurst broke his ankle, and then David Hurst's injury started. Beginning of the end for him, really. So I think a player that I wish would have signed would have been David Hurst, because in his pomp, he was unreal. But then probably luckily that we didn't sign him. Because, I mean, other players, Gascoigne's an obvious one that could tick both boxes as well. And Shearer was the one that I'd so desperately wanted him in 92 and even more so in 96 after his performance in the Euros, but it wasn't to be. But I'd say David Hurst probably just nips it.
Let's jump headlong into 98-99. We're going to start with the battle at the top of the league. In the Charity Shield, reigning double winners Arsenal put down a marker against Manchester United, winning 3-0 with goals from Overmars, Reina and Elka. They will be the two main players in the title race again, but as always, let's look at a few of the runners and riders. Chelsea recover from an opening day defeat at Coventry to go unbeaten for the remainder of the calendar year. They're actually top after Boxing Day, before defeat to Arsenal and costly drop points against mid-table opposition in the second half of the season fall off the pace and just short in both the title race and in Europe. And Aston Villa start the season in the same form they'd finished the previous season, despite losing Dwight Yorke and Steve Staunton. Top at Christmas, a 10-game spell between mid-January and April does put paid to any hopes, though, of a serious title tilt. I mean, James, in the calendar year of 1998, only Arsenal pick up more points than Villa. Having been plucked from relative obscurity, just how good a job did John Gregory do?
Yeah, he was great. He'd come from Wickham, of course, ex-Villa player, and that's what we like. We like it when ex-Villa players come in. He replaced Brian Little, and that was he was at Leicester, which was a more high-profile job, but he was ex-Villa player. So that was the sort of the thinking at the time. We get an ex-Villa player in with some managerial experience and see what happens. And, he was good and he was a character. And I remember him saying to reporters that when Dwight Yorke came to him and said he wanted to move to Man U, he said, if I had a gun, I would have shot him. He just no filter whatsoever. Yes, I would have shot Dwight Yorke.
If Josh Pugh was here, Josh Pugh would say, well, that was the gaffer.
That was the gaffer.
Yeah, he did a really good job. And it's that thing, it does entertain me, this kind of, in the calendar year, we did such and such. Because, 2023, Villa had in the calendar year. But it is the thing that losers say. It is. It's not. It's the real quiz is throwing the shoes over the pub, isn't it? That's what it is. Well, in the calendar year. The calendar year doesn't mean anything. That's not how the football season works, mate.
I was going to say, James, alluding to your podcast, World Cup of Euros, I'm sure we'll talk about at some point. If we had World Cup of calendar years, Villa are right up there, aren't they?
Yeah, we're really good calendar years.
The Villa Christmas party, God knows what happens, and then it just sort of all goes to part after Christmas.
That start to that season was so ridiculously good and unexpected that my granddad, who was in the sort of final stages of dementia in a home, and a Villa fan when he was his whole life, as my dad and me. And pretty much the last time I went to visit him in a home, and he had no idea what was going on, who anyone was or anything. But it was it was late November that year. And I remember sitting in his room in the old folks' home. And then he looked at me, and then there was then you could see in his eyes a sort of moment of recognition. And he just went, "Hello, James," like that. And I was like, "Oh, hello." And his first question was, "How are the Villa doing?" And I said, because it was true, they're top of the league. And he looked at me as if to say, no, they're not. Stop humouring an old man.
Don't patronise me, James, with this nonsense.
Come on. No.
Oh,
we were a decent team that year. There was a big thing. I remember I went to see them lose to Celta Vigo in the UEFA Cup. And there was a big deal about how our first 11, it was an all English first 11 and how amazing that was. And I remember at the time thinking, yeah, I'd rather they were like an all German first 11 though, because that'd be better. It's all very well being patriotic, but England weren't that good at this time.
Yeah, a team full of lads called Klaus.
Yeah. But John Gregory sort of got a team we had some standout performers. Dion Dublin was really good this season. We got Paul Merson, who could still turn it on. We had some solid defenders and some good sort of journeyman players. And he coalesced them into a team that for a brief while were really good. But as soon as we had to start playing the best teams in the division, we got found out. And actually 6th was a decent finish for that squad. But we always remember that year with it could have been. And a lot of the fans groups were like, the reason is because Doug Ellis didn't give John Gregory any money to spend at Christmas. Had he? Sure, if he'd bought Ronaldo, maybe we'd have won the league. But we were always only ever going to be a sort of top mid-table team, I think, at best.
Did Villa fans, James, ever think about? Obviously, Gregory alluded to shooting Dwight Yorke when he left. Does the narrative ever prevail that if we'd have kept Dwight Yorke that year, we might have won it?
No, I don't think so. Because with the Dwight Yorke money, we bought Dion Dublin and Paul Merson. And I would say that's Dublin scores like 14 goals, which is a decent return. And, Merson does his thing. So I wasn't that big a deal. It wasn't like we were a one-man team and Dwight Yorke was that man. So we kind of resigned to the fact that our best players will leave. We're in a strange place now in 2024 because the reason players are going to leave now is because we have to fulfill FFP criteria, which is obviously because, Villa massively overspending has completely ruined football.
Yeah, you're the bastards.
Yeah. But us, Forest and Everton, we're ruining football for everyone.
Honestly, we could just stop.
But we've always been the kind of, if we had a player who was really good, it's like, well, he'll be here for a bit and then they'll go to somewhere better. When we lost Milner and Gareth Barry, and we lost Grealish not long ago. That's kind of expected. So it wasn't really that big a deal. We were annoyed. And to go to Man U, particularly at that time, who were the team that everyone hated, that was annoying. But we get over it. We're used to it, mate.
And the thing is with the Dwight Yorke thing as well, when we signed him, you obviously know he's a decent player, but was it 18.5 million, something like that?
It wasn't.
I think United fans overall were quite, not underwhelmed, might be too strong, but it wasn't like we were elated.
Aston Villa being the last top flight team to name an all English side in this season. Can you remember which match that was in? I don't know what this says about naming an all-English team.
I don't know which game it is, but it was certainly a big deal amongst the fans at the time. And in hindsight, it sounds really sort of right-wing and
Well, I think it was at this time where obviously there's a lot of fuss and a lot of focus on the amount of overseas players coming into the Premier League. Obviously, we now know that that's part of the course. It was actually a 4-1 defeat at home to Coventry City, which is probably not fondly remembered.
This is why no one does it anymore.
Yeah.
That whole thing of, how do we get more English players in the Premier League? That only ever happens when England are doing badly internationally. You'll notice since 2018, no one has mentioned it at all.
Yeah, no, very true. So, coming to the two main challengers then for the league title. On opening day, David Beckham inspires a late comeback for Manchester United, assisting Teddy Sheringham before scoring a last-minute free kick to salvage a 2-2 draw against Leicester City. He celebrates in front of a jubilant crowd just weeks after his red card on Diego Simeone had made him public enemy number one. Marv, there's been a lot of recent chat about this. A quarter of a century later, the release of several documentaries, including Beckham's own documentary. What do you remember, I guess, as a Manchester United fan, welcoming him back? Because the hatred that was around for him at that time in the media and at stadiums up and down the land was, vitriolic, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was horrendous. Going back to that place I worked in Preston, a very working class place full of earthy northern sorts, they were absolutely vitriolic towards him in the immediate aftermath. The following day in work, which was a Wednesday or Thursday, I can't remember, it was immediately, it's his fault. It's that little bastard's fault. It's, and it just grew and grew. And there was the Sun, printing dartboards on the front of the newspaper with Beckham as the bullseye and the hanging effigies and all that sort of thing that came. It was absolutely, it was so over the top. And that was before Twitter, man. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Imagine what it would be like now. And it was, although you could argue that the tabloid press was Twitter back then, but it was a disgrace. And let's be honest, it was because of who he was and who he played for and who he was married to, all that sort of stuff, wasn't it? But United fans, there wasn't what, I don't remember any dissenting voices about it. It was like, fuck him, get him back here and let's just crack on. Because there was an anti-England feeling around United fans anyway, because often United players would be getting booed when playing for England.
At West Ham away early in the season as well, in particular, that's a really spicy atmosphere.
Yeah, I went to West Ham away and it was so moody. It was unbelievable. And, just that in the streets, you let your country down. You let your country down. It was just relentless. And but some of the United fans there that day, honestly, I've never seen harder looking Reds away from home. It almost like everyone just turned up who could handle themselves. It was me and my mate Nadeem who couldn't punch our way out of a paper bag. It was intense that day.
Beckham will begin his redemption during this season, as we'll cover. With Chelsea and Villa leading the way for the first half of the season, it does put extra focus on the Man United versus Arsenal fixtures. It's advantage Wenger on their first meeting as Arsenal demolished the Red Devils 3-0. Goals from Adams, Anelka and new boy Freddie Ljungberg with his first goal for the club. Marv, you're coming off the back of a trophyless season. Opening 5 games, 8 points. It's a slow start by Man United's normal standards. You've comprehensively lost to Arsenal Shield twice in the space of a month, if you include the Charity Shield. Is there a genuine fear here that there's a bit of a changing of the guard coming? Man, you've dominated so much of the night. Is Arsenal have won the double? Is it? Are you genuinely thinking we're handing over the baton at any point?
I don't know if it was as negative as that, but my God, we were scared to death of them. I was scared to death of them as a fan. They were such an intimidating side. You had big lads throughout, Bergkamp and Anelka up front, like 6 foot plus. You got Vieira, you got Petit, you got pace on the wings of Overmars. They were just such a threatening, intimidating side with threat from everywhere. And they absolutely, they handed us a bit of a paste in it in the Charity Shield, and then obviously the game at Highbury. But it's all on the back of how they've caught us up 10-point lead at the back of the previous season and done what they've done. So it did definitely feel like, it felt like as a kid, I remember playing against around under 13s, under 14s. I was late to puberty. I remember I was played fullback. I remember suddenly you'd be up against a winger who had a better beard than you, Carl. And you felt like you were just up against bigger boys.
Yeah. Yeah.
It definitely felt like United were up against bigger boys, and Arsenal were the bigger boys at that time.
Yeah. Yeah, they completely changed. And I think we've talked about this a few times on this show as well. But I mean, I think Fergie was genuinely like, I think with Blackburn, with other sides, it had always felt a little bit like a flash in the pan. And actually with Arsenal and Wenger, it certainly felt like this was a sustained challenge and a proper rival.
Yeah, they were just, like I say, that they're such a good side and with so few weaknesses. And I'm sure as the season goes on, we'll talk about other things, but about how they raise the standard of United and everyone else. But you get these teams that come along, don't you? Like Wenger comes along, Guardiola comes along, Mourinho comes along, and everything just goes up a notch. And that's definitely what Arsenal were doing at the time.
I was going to talk about how Villa beat Arsenal.
Yeah, in December. They beat them, didn't they?
Yeah, in December of that year, Villa actually beat Arsenal. They came from 2-0 down at half-time to win 3-2, which is the opposite of what Villa normally do. Villa usually throw away 2-goal leads. We don't ever sort of overcome them. And, Dion Dublin scores twice in that game. Do you remember, though, what happened at half-time in that game?
Oh, I feel like
no, I do.
Give me a clue. Come on, let's go into quiz mode.
Santa Claus.
Parachute.
Yes.
Yeah.
Santa Claus on a parachute. Amazing.
Yeah.
Why doesn't it happen anymore?
Well, I'll tell you why. Because he hit the roof of the stand.
We hit the roof. Yes.
And lost a leg.
Right. So I think we've established why it doesn't happen anymore, haven't we, James?
Yeah. But that was such a huge news story around here because it happened at Villa Park. It's supposed to be part of a charity parachute jump. The guy, ex-forces, hits the top of the Trinity Road stand, falls to the ground. The second half is delayed while the medics run on and everything. Eventually, he loses a leg, but he marries his rehab nurse and goes on to row the Atlantic.
But hang on, why isn't this a film?
Someone needs to write that screenplay.
Well, I think we know what we're doing this afternoon, don't we, gentlemen?
That was a game I remember listening to on the radio.
It never happened before, and obviously after the leg thing, it was never going to happen again, was it? But what a good idea. But
he actually later apologised to anyone who was in the ground that day who was traumatised. They came to watch a game of football and ended up seeing Santa Claus bounce off the stadium roof. And he was in a coma until the new year. And as you say, James, went on to marry, have 2 sons with his nurse, which is incredible, absolutely incredible.
And he made the apology. That's classic. That's just classic Santa humility at the end of the day.
It's the most British thing I've ever heard. I'm so sorry. I lost a leg. It might have ruined your football match.
Nigel Rogoff, what a guy. And he's still alive and well and doing charity events to this day. In the end, Manchester United's defeat at Highbury is just one of 3 all season in the league as they hang in on the leading pack's coattails before putting pedal to the metal after Christmas to rise to the top of the pile, including a remarkable 8-1 away win at the City Ground against a hapless Nottingham Forest. Ole Solskjaer comes off the bench to score 4 in the second half. Could be a useful sub to have later in the season.
I stood next to Ken Doherty that day at the City Ground, the snooker player who'd just been... Ken
Doherty, yeah.
Yeah, he's world champion at the time. And that's not really the story. That's just simply a fact of what happened to Marv that day in his life. But we'd beaten the Scouts. We'd beaten Liverpool the week before 2-1 in the cup, and Solskjaer had scored the winner. He was subbed that day at Forest before coming on to score 4. And you've never seen a substitute warm up as much in your life, because all he wanted to do was just be near us, because all the United fans would say, who put the ball in the Scousers' net? Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, just for the whole game. So by the time he came on, it was like the king returning from battle to come and be in front of his people. And then he gets 1, and we went berserk. Even though he puts like 5-1 up, we've gone absolutely bananas. And then he gets a second, and then he gets a third. When he got the fourth, even though we've gone 8-1 up, and you should, normally a crowd is just like, yeah, whatever by that point. If you look at the United fans behind the ground, there's limbs, mate. They're going absolutely. We went absolutely bananas. It was some day, and even though Forest were awful that year, you came off the ground, and you knew you'd seen something that day. Sometimes you come off a football match and you think, I'm not forgetting this one. Skipping away from the ground, it was unbelievable.
Yeah. Not known for his enthusiasm. He certainly is one of those. I mean, still to this day, there's not many. I can't think of many players who scored 4 in a game away from home, and certainly not from the bench. I mean, that's an incredible achievement, as you say, albeit against a pretty poor Forest team.
Yeah, and Dwight Yorke was fuming with Fergie apparently for coming off having scored 2, and then Solskjaer goes on and scores 4. He wanted his hat-trick, obviously, Yorkie.
Arsenal are involved in one of the Premier League's most bizarre incidents to this day. They lose to an 89th minute Lee Briscoe goal at Hillsborough. This was quite early in the season, in a game best remembered for Paulo Di Canio's push on referee Paul Alcock that would earn him an 11-game ban. I mean, James, we don't see many Santas bouncing off stadium roofs. What about talismanic strikers pushing over a referee? What do you remember about that match?
I remember watching that and thinking, if that had been someone like Paul Durkin, he wouldn't have gone down. Is it Paul Alcock? He was the really scrawny referee, And I just, if it was someone a bit more solid.
Yeah, Durkin was quite a squat character, wasn't he?
He would have gone. He was just gone. Yeah. You can't do that, mate. That's the same, isn't it?
Uriah Rennie would have lamped him.
Yeah, and he kind of goes down in installments. So quite similar to sort of how George Foreman goes down in the Rumble in the Jungle.
I've never seen anyone fall like that before or since.
Yeah, but that's how people fall in real life. It's not like in the movies. When you see violence in real life, it's really jarring how non-cinematic it is.
Yeah. There's an ugliness to it, wasn't there?
There's a moment that's often forgotten where Nigel Winterburn, known as probably a bit of a hard man himself, he's really laying into Paulo Di Canio, and he sort of flinches back as if don't think anyone knows what Paulo Di Canio is going to do next. Although I think the story goes that Di Canio was kind of giving a relatively playful shove in the back of Vieira's in the back of Vieira, because they used to be teammates, and that's what causes Keown to kick off and the red card. So the whole thing is potentially based on a bit of a misunderstanding. It does end in an 11-game ban for Paulo Di Canio.
When you've said Winterburn flinch, let's have it right. He shit himself.
I can completely see how Martin Keown would misunderstand a bit of playful nonsense for something way more sinister. Having met Martin Keown, that is an intense and serious man right there.
Is that like a sporting dinner thing or a Villa connection or what? How did you meet Martin Keown?
I was on The Football's On, Ian Stone's show on TNT Sports earlier this year at Villa Park. And for some reason, I know the reason, because Ian Stone's an Arsenal fan. He, as the ex-Villa player, he put on Martin Keown, who everyone at Villa hates. So hardly anyone showed up to the recording anyway, because Martin Keown's story about playing for Villa is we got relegated, then we got promoted, then I left. But yeah, and I was trying to keep it light, and he was going off on one about, what it's like being relegated and things.
Very much from the Chris Sutton of school of punditry, isn't he, really? Just it's a bit dry.
It became a thing, though, afterwards. Like, I was already not a fan of Winterburn. It was something about him that I never liked. And then when he flinched / shat himself, honestly, it took it to new levels. I could really go into how much I hated him, to be honest, but I won't, because I might end up. Yeah, James is just like, no, Marv, don't go there. But Honestly, it was such an irrational dislike of Nigel Winterburn. There's a bit of sick coming up now, which isn't helped by my hiatus hernia. But should we move on?
After a 1-1 draw between Arsenal and Man United in February and a pivotal night where United blow a 2-goal lead at Anfield as Arsenal win 3-1 at Spurs, it will all eventually come down to the final week. And with 2 games left to play, Manchester United and Arsenal are on equal points and identical goal difference in a title race for the ages. If you thought recent examples of teams supposedly not being motivated to benefit their rivals was a new phenomenon, 98-99 had more storylines than EastEnders at Christmas. First off, Arsenal went to Elland Road on a 19-game unbeaten run to face their hero of yesteryear, David O'Leary. A late Jimmy Floyd Hasselbank goal would put the title race firmly in Manchester United's hands at relegation-haunted Blackburn the following night. Man United go to Ewood Park, and a goalless draw means they can't fully seize the opportunity to all but secure a 5th title in 7 years, but it is still advantage Fergie going into the final game. With Arsenal at home to the Villa on the final day, all Manchester United have to do is match the Gunners' result against the Spurs side, who, surprise, surprise, were expected to roll over and have their tummy tickled. That's when Les Ferdinand put the Lily Whites into a first-half lead to silence the home end and some of the away end. Marv, there are more than a few moments this season when the treble dream looks dead and buried. This is one of them, when Ferdinand put Spurs in the lead. How worried were you?
Well, I was very worried, but because... Well, what worried me more, I'll be honest, Carl, was the chances that we started missing after the goal. You know, you can handle, because Spurs are, let's have it, they're a better side now. I mean, back then they were Spursy. Sorry, no offense intended. Well, that's where the original term started, was because of teams of that sort of era, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So going 1 down to Spurs early on wasn't the issue, but it was the chances we started missing. And luckily, Beckham equalises, quite close to half time. But if we'd have gone in half time 1-0 down, there was anxiety. There was definite growing anxiety. But also referring back to that time and our running, we drew the last 4 away games.
Yeah.
It wasn't like we were just like all conquering, because that's what title runnings were like back then. Teams would fall apart a little bit and then come again. And Arsenal went to Leeds and lost. The boring predictability of modern runnings now is, it really is turgid, and it turns people off. But back then, title runnings were proper runnings, I believe.
Yeah.
Man United win the league this year with 79 points.
Exactly, mate. Yeah.
79. Yeah. Which would, it would get you 4th most seasons now.
We lost. There was a period in mid-December where I think Middlesbrough were above us at one point in December. They won at Old Trafford, and my mate Nadeem, who I used to go to the match with, there was a writer in the Telegraph called David Miller. And after that game where Middlesbrough win at United 3-2 in mid-December, this guy wrote in the Daily Telegraph, the question now is not whether Manchester United will regain the title, but whether Middlesbrough will win their first. And when coaches and managers read something like that and they put it in the dressing room for the rest of the season, my mate put it up in his room. as if he's part of the United setup, that he's going to use that as motivation for everywhere we go. That fucking David Miller, honestly, I'll make that bastard eat his words. It's like, Nadeem, you're a history graduate. Get a grip on yourself. Middlesbrough were a good side that season at times.
They were back up. They were such a strange team in that period as well, weren't they? Because they had such ambition, but never quite realised it. But Middlesbrough like top 4 for like the first half of the season, I think, for the promoted side. And James, I imagine maybe your focus on this final day was on Villa at Highbury, was it? What do you remember about that final day? Because Villa told Arsenal off nothing. I remember this being a theme that actually, if there's very little on it for Villa, it's not something you tend to store.
No, I'm just trying to think where I was May 1999. I think I remember listening out for what was happening in the Man U Spurs game, because that sounded more interesting. We were we'd been on the beach since January. As soon as it was when we lost to Fulham in the FA Cup, who were in the 3rd tier at that point. That I think that was when we just went, this season's done. Well, let's just play it out.
Despite conceding just 17 goals in their league campaign, with David Seaman keeping 19 clean sheets, it had been defeat at Elland Road that had shifted a title fight for the ages back into Fergie's favour right at the last. The rivalry between the two teams and managers was ramped up even further. On matching Sir Matt Busby's 5 titles, Fergie's asked if he can match his European record and also go on to win all 3 as well. That was the hardest one, he says. We go to Wembley now, we go to win, and then to Barcelona for the greatest day of our lives. We're going to enjoy it, he says, in a, let's face it, pretty decent prediction of what his next fortnight's going to look like. So Manchester United win their 5th title in 7 years, but remarkably, their first one in front of the Old Trafford faithful since the days of Sir Matt Busby. All of their other title wins have either happened while they've been watching on TV or away from home and so on. Were you there that day, Marv, when you won the title?
I was on the Stretford end, yeah. And yes, I was. It was one of them. I was quite close to. You can hear Schmeichel fall into the net on the TV because of the microphone. But obviously, on the day, I just remember hearing a pin drop when the goal went in. There's just that, couple of thousand of Spurs fans going absolutely berserk. Yeah, you had those moments where sometimes it's just that absolute stillness, and it's just like shit.
Yeah.
And so I'm contradicting what I said earlier on when I wasn't that worried. But obviously, when the goal goes in, you are worried. Because our form hadn't been amazing going into that. So, but yeah, it was unbelievable. And so I was at the same end where Cole scores the winner, and yeah, it was amazing. And even though it's our 5th title, I'd grown up watching Liverpool win everything and hating Liverpool and despising Liverpool, and you constantly feel like you're that little brother who's probably been bullied when they were younger. My big brother used to put fags out on my arm. It felt like that sort of childhood I had because of Liverpool. And so when you suddenly start winning, even though it was the 5th, it still felt as amazing as the 1st because we're still catching Liverpool up. Yeah. And we had, I still felt a real complex. I still do about Liverpool. Liverpool and Nigel Winterburn are my things, really. So yeah, it was an amazing day. And like you say, winning it at home was just unbelievable. It was unbelievable.
We're going to move on to the top scorers for this season. It's a comparatively low bar by modern standards that will get you a place on this list. Here's the top 10 in full. There's 4 players in joint 7th. Dion Dublin, now of Aston Villa, Robbie Fowler of Liverpool, Alan Shearer of Newcastle in, I think, an injury-hit season, and Julian Joachim, who emerges for Villa as well as a real useful player during this season. Hamilton Ricard is 6th for Middlesbrough with 15 goals.
Of course
Andy Cole and Nicholas Anelka have 17 each in joint 4th. But with the Golden Boot for shared 3 ways once again this season with 18 is Michael Owen, Dwight Yorke and Jimmy Floyd Hasselbank, who's still at Leeds. Jimmy, by the way, is also joint top of the assists list with 13, meaning he contributes to exactly half of all Leeds United's goals this season. This is the 2nd season in a row that 18 is enough to get a Golden Boot, and also the 2nd season in a row it's a 3-way tie, with Michael Owen a recipient once again alongside Yorke, who's now gone to new pastures, and Hasselbank, who is about to. Now, what was significant about Michael Owen's goal against West Ham United in December 1998 that actually did have an impact on where the Golden Boot landed? And this is a bit of trivia that I don't necessarily know was open knowledge until very recently. Michael Owen's goal against West Ham United in December 1998.
Was it originally sort of put down as an own goal, or because they had that dubious goals panel who would assign who scored which goal, something like that?
You're along the right lines. Not an own goal, but maybe the dubious goals panel should have been looking at this one.
Oh, was he on the line or something and tapping in, or there was a deflection off one of his own players? Maybe.
So what happened? Have you got a guess, Marv? I can see you like deep in thought.
I've got nothing. I keep thinking about Santa losing his leg every now and again, to be honest, mate.
Can you get PTSD for something you weren't there for? That's the thing. That's what we discovered.
Well, this is what we're soon going to find out, aren't we? But no, I've got nothing on the Michael Owen goal mystery.
So Jamie Carragher actually scored the goal very recently on Monday Night Football. Carragher admitted that he did a deal with Owen to agree that his right-footed shot from a corner had been flicked in by Owen, who was going for the Golden Boot at the time. In Carragher's words, he doesn't get anything on that, and maybe being the lad that I am, I let him have it, and he's got a golden boot at home. Gary Neville responds by saying, sounds a bit criminal, that isn't that illegal? When you actually watch the goal, Carragher kind of hits it across and Owen sort of swings for it. There doesn't appear to be an angle that shows definitively whether Owen scored it or not. So I assume the referee checks. Carragher agrees that Owen got it. And without that goal, he would not have won his second Golden Boot, albeit jointly. So there you go. The previous season, Owen also jointly won the Golden Boot with 18 goals. There's only ever been one other season in the Premier League era where under 20 goals has been enough for a Golden Boot. Do you want to take a guess? I'll tell you. I'll give you the season, see if you can guess who got it. 2008, 2009.
I think it might be a Manchester United player. I think it might be Dimitar Berbatov.
It's not Berbatov.
I will try Drogba.
No, you're closer though. Nicholas Anelka.
Oh,
Nicholas Anelka with 19 goals in 2008, 2009. And because football wasn't invented in 1992, I have been back through the archives to see if any other player has ever won the top flight Golden Boot with 18 goals or fewer. No fewer. That's the lowest it's ever been, although Jimmy Settle for Everton did equal it with 18 goals in 01-02, but that is 1901-1902. So there you go.
Yeah, I imagine back in like the 50s, like the top 5 goal scorers would have been minimum 30 goals, wouldn't they? It was just ludicrous back then.
Yeah, higher, and probably more games as well in a league season as well. Obviously, the cut down of the things that probably contributes to it. But yeah, still, 20, you're going to need 20 plus goals for a Golden Boot pretty much any other season in the top flight.
Absolutely.
So moving on to the battle at the bottom. Big spending Blackburn Rovers are the shock side to lose their Premier League status this season. In a campaign that began in the UEFA Cup, Roy Hodgson is dismissed after a slow start sees them drop into the relegation zone. Perennial caretaker Tony Parks would fill the void until Brian Kidd stepped away from Old Trafford and into the hot seat. He gets off to a great start, lifting them out the drop zone with a 5-game unbeaten run, and actually wins December's Manager of the Month in the process. But it will all end in tears, literally, as Jack Walker watches on from the stands. As that 0-0 draw at Ewood Park against Manchester United in the penultimate game of the season, in front of the TV cameras, helpfully sends the title race to a nail-biting final weekend, but also feels like a bit of a wake for one of the Premier League era's first fairy tales. Marv, I know we've kind of covered it from a Manchester United point of view, but what do you remember about that game and what it meant for Blackburn? And of course, Brian Kidd. There's a relatively frosty handshake at the end, actually, with Fergie. What do you remember about it?
Yeah, well, I think the reason for that the story went amongst United fans that Kidd, even at that stage, I mean, Ferguson was going to go on for another 14 years, wasn't he? I think something like that. I think Kidd at that stage was starting to angle like, how much longer are you going to be around? Question one. Question two, will you put me forward as the one to take over, like he did with Moyes much later on? And Ferguson's reported response was, sorry, Brian, no. And that was sort of the moment where Kidd went, okay, so I'm going to move on then. And I think that was the story anyway behind the frostiness at the time. It would be a good explanation, I guess.
So the Blair and Brown of football at that point, and off Kidd goes to Blackburn, walking out on, let's face it, one of the most historic seasons in English football, and to take Blackburn down, probably not a great decision in the scheme of things.
And I think I'm right. In saying this. He's replaced by Steve McLaren, isn't he, as number 2 at Manchester United? So maybe had he not gone, there's no McLaren arc that ends with England not qualifying for the 2008 Euros.
Yeah, I think you've got a good point there. And clubs now, I mean, will Brighton have their next manager off the rank, next cab off the rank sort of thing ready to go, like now that De Zerbi's left? I don't think Fergie was necessarily ready to find a new number 2. So I think he was good mates with Jim Smith. I imagine that what Fergie did, he just rang a few of his mates and said, any of your coaches any good, lads?
Yeah.
Any chance of me nicking them? It turned out to, be a huge benefit to McLaren. And like you say, all ends with the Wally, with the Brolly, etc.
Charlton Athletic begin life back in the top flight with points at St James's and Highbury, sandwiching a 5-0 win over Southampton at the Valley that sees them briefly top the table. David Howells does a spell in goal for Southampton during that game after Paul Jones is sent off. Despite the strong start, a spell without a league win that stretches from Halloween to the end of January will take it to the final day, but ultimately Charlton finish 18th. Alan Kirby retains the support of the board and fans, though, and they will be back. Speaking of Southampton, that 5-0 defeat on match week 2 will leave them bottom, and they'll remain in the bottom 3 all the way through the season until May, when a 3-game winning streak to end the season will be enough to lift them out the drop zone for the first time all season at Charlton's expense. The bargain additions of Hassan Kashlul and Marian Pahars help them over the line, as well as a healthy contribution from Matt Letitia, whose magic is beginning to show signs of fading.
Do you know what Marian Pahars' nickname was?
No, go on.
The Latvian Michael Owen.
Oh, well, that's quite a complimentary nickname, I suppose. Yeah.
So I think Michael Owen's nickname should be the English Marian Pahars.
Correct. And my mate, who was a big Southampton fan, he used to talk about Marian. Whenever he mentioned Pahars in the pub, he'd do it in the style of Alan Partridge. Pahars!
And another one.
Also, on that, I remember there was a big thing about him being a man called Marian, wasn't there? That was often said in the media, I think.
Hang on. There were loads of footballers around this era. There was Beattie, there was Edie, there was Flo. It's just old woman names in the Premier League. And of course, Hernan Crespo.
Brilliant.
Meanwhile, at Highfield Road, the goals of Noel Whelan and Darren Huckabee are just enough to replace the outgoing Dion Dublin. Pierre van Hooijdonk, the Dutch striker who'd fired Nottingham Forest back into the top flight, returns from France 98 and requests a transfer after feeling let down by what he considers a lack of strengthening to the squad that had been promised. He promptly goes on strike after this request is refused. The standoff lasts until November, by which point he realises he's going nowhere. He goes on to score 6 times in 21 games, with his teammates notably refusing to celebrate with him for his first goal back against Derby. He gets his move back to Vitesse for the following season as Forest finish bottom and return to Division 1. James, Pierre van Hooijdonk's strike, perfectly acceptable behaviour from a unionised worker or spoiled Mardy Bellend?
Little column A, little column B. He's right. His grievance isn't you're not paying me enough money or I want this. His grievance is you said we were going to strengthen the team and you haven't done that. You've actually weakened it. So I want to leave, which I think is a fair enough stance for a footballer to take. But also, isn't he's like 29, 30 at this point. So it's, who's going to come in for him realistically? But I do think, going on strike is just, come on, mate, just play football. You've made your point. Ask for a transfer, be put on the transfer list, but you can still show up. And in fact, maybe looking like you like playing football and getting the odd goal, maybe that will make it more likely for someone to come and buy you than, who should we buy? Should we buy the guy who's sulking? No. The one who's potentially going to just, ruin the atmosphere in the dressing room. No, they're not going to buy you. So I think he had a valid grievance, but I think he handled it very badly.
I remember going back to the City ground, the 8-1, Jaap Stam was marking him, and there was a ball played into the channels. Well, it was more towards the touchline, to be honest. And Jaap just came across and just absolutely Jaap Stammed him over the touchline, and he went flying into the Forest fans. I just remember almost like the whole ground, like sort of smiling about it, really. Forest fans as well, but yeah, unlucky Pierre. But there wasn't much love for him, really. But I agree with James. He did have a point, but yeah, just get on with it. You're not making yourself an attractive proposition, are you?
No. But I mean, I tell you what, he didn't have to score some goals everywhere he went. His goal record's absolutely incredible. This is one of the few seasons, probably due to this level of harmony with it or disharmony with his teammates, he doesn't actually get so many. Everton endure what is seemingly their annual flirt with the drop, bobbing just above the red line for much of the season and falling below it as late as April. The inspired loan signing of Kevin Campbell, though, one of the players that Forest sold that upset Pierre van Hooijdonk quite so much, is enough to fire them to safety. In the end, then, it's Blackburn, Charlton and Forest who go down, while perennial survivors Southampton and Coventry do just enough once again. So we're going to leave 98-99 behind for a moment for one of our features. When you boys were on last time, we did the first ever Premier League of Nations Hall of Fame, and we put an Albanian into the Premier League of Nations Hall of Fame. We've been doing it alphabetically since then. We're pretty much up to Cameroon. So I'm going to give you the 4 players that I've shortlisted as the greatest Cameroonian Premier League player. You just have to tell me which one you think is the best. And before we do that, there have been 35 Cameroonian players in the Premier League at the time of recording. Here's a few that didn't quite make the cut. It's not Cameroon legends Samuel Eto'o or Rigobert Song, whose best days were outside the Premier League, let's face it. It's not Andre Onana or Brian Mbeumo, who both perhaps have a little more to do in their Premier League careers to trouble the 4 men you're about to choose from. And it's not Eric Djemba-Djemba. So good, we didn't shortlist him twice. So here are the 4 players that I put to you are the Premier League's greatest ever Cameroonian. So is it Alex Song? Losing his father, age 3, his uncle Rigobert helped guide his journey into football in a career that took him 6 years at Arsenal in the Premier League and later a return to West Ham via Barcelona, where he won the first and only major trophy of his career, lifting the La Liga title. He made 190 Premier League appearances across 9 seasons. Or is it Lauren, another Cameroonian with Arsenal connections, with 184 appearances, most of them in the red of Highbury? He also appeared 25 times for Portsmouth, with 2 Premier League titles to his name. The most memorable came in 03-04, where he's one of Arsenal's invincibles, having gone an entire season unbeaten. Or is it Jeremy, the 2-time Premier League winner for Chelsea, who also played for Newcastle and Middlesbrough? He'd won 2 Champions Leagues with Real Madrid before that, and also has 118 caps for his country. Or is it Mark Vivian Foe? Perhaps a sentimental choice, but the popular midfielder who made 73 Premier League appearances for Manchester City and West Ham was representing his country for the 62nd time when he collapsed and died during a match in the 2003 Confederations Cup. He'd been ill before the match. His manager had tried to substitute him just a few minutes earlier, but he'd been adamant that he wanted to play in the stadium of his adopted hometown of Lyon. He was just 28. A sombre end to our Cameroonian players. Marv, I'll come to you first. Any thoughts on any of those players or any I've perhaps missed out?
Well, I mean, we all wish that Roger Miller had played in the Premier League, don't we? I mean, whenever the word Cameroon is mentioned, it's quite a basic thing for a middle-aged white man to say, but I'm immediately taken to Roger Miller's dance. So once I've got past that in my head, I can start to answer your question. I think Lauren was a great player. I think he was a really, really good player. And I think if we're going at it from a purely playing perspective, he's got to be the man, hasn't he, really? But Alex Song, you know, losing his dad and having an Uncle Rigobert. Imagine having an Uncle Rigobert. It's just a nice thing to have, isn't it? You know, at Christmas time, they're all here. Uncle Len, Uncle Walter, Uncle Steve, Rigobert's on it again. That's a nice image having an Uncle Rigobert around at Christmas. But despite that festive thought, I mean, we've got the Santas in the corner with no leg as well. Obviously, I moved towards it. I'm going to go for Lauren just because of the playing side. But yeah, Alex Song is a nice story, and having he might not have had a dad, bless him, but he did have an Uncle Rigobert. Still does.
Yeah, absolutely. James?
Annoyingly, I'm going to agree with Marv. Also, Lauren has a woman's name, and we like footballers.
How did I miss that?
Yeah,
I spotted it as soon as I read it out. I was like, "Oh, minute, we found another one here."
Yeah, mention for Eric Djemba-Djemba, who Villa bought off Man United in such a big con by Alex Ferguson. That transfer was. Ferguson conned Villa into buying Eric Djemba-Djemba. And you mentioned Alex Song and his uncle Rigobert. Rigobert Song, he played in the Premier League for Liverpool.
Here's a good player.
Here's a fun question. What does Rigobert Song and Zinedine Zidane have in common that no other players do in the history of football? Rigobert Song and Zinedine Zidane, they're the only players to have done something.
I mean, going with it, because I feel like you would have played at France 98. Is there a France 98 connection?
I mean, sort of.
Okay.
Is it actually a football connection, or is this?
No, it's football. It's football connection.
I've got no idea.
Have they both headbutted Marco Materazzi?
No, you're close. And it is the thing, 50% of the things that they have in common happened at France 98.
Is it something to do with violence?
Yeah, ish.
Uncle Rigobert's kicked off again. Have you seen?
He's been on the brandy again.
What happened when Zidane headbutted Materazzi?
He got a red card.
Okay.
Oh, so they've both been sent off.
You're going to have to finish that sentence.
For violent conduct in a World Cup.
No, they're the only 2 players to have ever been sent off twice at World Cups in 2 different World Cups.
Oh, wow. Okay. Wow.
Rigobert Song in 94 and 98, and Zinedine Zidane in 98 and 2006.
Fair play. Nice.
Yeah. Hey, have we done this? Do you know who Pat Nevin's cousin is?
Pat Nevin's cousin?
I'll give you a clue. It's another footballer.
Yeah, well, yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't even know where to begin on that. No, go on.
Terry Butcher.
Wow.
Terry Butcher and Pat Nevin are cousins. Right. And Kevin Phillips, of Sunderland, and he's cousins by marriage with someone who's not a footballer, but is in the public eye and will probably be quite a lot in the next 6 weeks, I'd say.
Oh, okay.
And the clue is the surname.
Jess Phillips.
Yeah.
Is it?
Kevin Phillips. Well, Jess Phillips is married to Kevin Phillips's cousin.
Wow, okay. Right. Well, there you go. We'll see Kevin Phillips out on the campaign trail, presumably being set up by Niall Quinn. So you've heard what the boys think about the greatest ever Cameroonian. We will put this out on X as usual for you to have your vote. So we're going to move on now to some of 98-99's biggest transfer stories. Arsenal bring in Freddie Ljungberg and Nwankwo Kanu, while all-time leading top scorer Ian Wright is, at the time at least, is allowed to leave for West Ham. Chelsea's star-studded foreign legion grows with Pierluigi Casaraghi, Marcel Desailly, Brian Laudrup and Albert Ferrer all joining. Manchester United signed Dwight Yorke from Aston Villa, with John Gregory telling the media that upon hearing the news, if he had a gun, he'd have shot him. Villa replace their star man with Dion Dublin and also signed David Unsworth for 5 minutes, while Blackburn sell James Beattie to Southampton and replace him with Kevin Davis, Nathan Blake, Ashley Ward and Matt Jansen. Clearly, Blackburn collecting strikers is not necessarily going to do them much good. Marv, how big a statement of a signing was Dwight Yorke? I mean, you've already got Cole, Sheringham, Solskjaer. As you mentioned, maybe fans were a little bit underwhelmed. How quickly did he win over the fans?
Pretty quickly. I think he brought an energy to the team. And I think quite early on, I think we played someone like Charlton at home, who were poor that season. Obviously, we talked about they went down. And him and Cole something just seemed to happen really, really quickly. And you saw a side of Cole that you'd never seen. So it wasn't necessarily what you were seeing specifically from Yorke. Sounds a bit cliche, I would say it, but it was what you saw from Cole that was only brought out because of Yorke.
Yeah.
And, I'm not even sure that Ferguson intended to have those 4 brilliant forwards that season. I think he might have been thinking, I bring Yorke in and I get rid of one. And, to see where United are now with just one striker is bizarre. But, I mean, back to your original question, I was a bit worried that he wasn't going to be all that. He did turn out to be all that, and he was absolutely brilliant. But I wasn't alone in thinking that, not sure about this, but he was amazing.
Yeah.
The goal, the Champions League goal that gets shown a lot of away at Barcelona in the Champions League in the group stage, him and Cole, the combination play, it's just beautiful, beautiful.
Yeah, they're a proper partnership. Back in the days as well, when you saw 2 strikers up top, it was a bit more common than what you see these days. And I think you're right as well about the number of strikers he kind of collected. Ole Solskjaer very nearly moved to Spurs as well, and how different that could have all been. James, I mean, you signed Dion Dublin as a replacement. How successful was he? And does coming from Coventry mean he has to do a bit more to win over the fans, or is that not really a thing?
It's not really a thing. It's such a one-way rivalry, the Villa-Coventry rivalry. They really hate Villa, particularly because a couple of seasons after this, we relegate them, or it's in the game against Villa that they are relegated. Whereas we just see them as, oh, look, it's Coventry. It's those guys. We want to beat them, obviously, but we don't care. So, we were always buying players off Coventry. And vice versa, by the way. They were buying players off us, and it wasn't a big deal at all. We like Dion Dublin. He's still thought of very fondly around Villa Park. Yes, for the goals he scored, but also for the headbutt he put on Robbie Savage.
He really lost it that day, didn't he? That night.
Oh, I was there. That game was not fun. Those games are toxic, and I don't want to go to them anymore. And me and my brother left halfway through. We left just after Dublin went off, and we just going, let's just get out of here, because it was just horrible. We were in the Holt as well, and and we were looking around, and we could see fights breaking out everywhere where rogue Blues fans had got in, and we just like, we don't want to be here for this, so we just left. But that wasn't this season, so yeah. We liked him. And apparently, according to Alex Ferguson, he's got a massive cock.
Well, there you go. I mean, I'm going to say you heard it first.
Once Alex Ferguson say big, it was magnificent about Dion Dublin.
Yeah,
pretty sure.
I think that's accurate.
Wow.
Accurate in terms of what Ferguson said. I don't know about the dimensions of Dublin's old fella.
Hey, Alex Ferguson saw us lose 5-1 to Newcastle on the opening day and say, I think Villa are going to be all right this season. So I believe everything he says about everything now.
Well, there we go. Dion Dublin, current.
Magnificent, apparently.
It's very rare you have such in-depth knowledge on the Fowler side of a daytime TV presenter, isn't it? It's not common. So yeah, it's great. Going back to David Unsworth for a moment.
He invented a musical instrument. Does everyone remember this?
The Jew, was it called the Jew? The Jew? Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah.
He looked at the orchestra and he went, "This is missing something."
Going back to David Unsworth, at the time he was at West Ham, he was keen to be closer to his wife's native Liverpool for the sake of his young family. His old club Everton were in for him, but John Gregory, who had a Steve Staunton-shaped hole to fill on the left side of his defence after the Irishman's own move to Merseyside, sealed the signing. He asked Unsworth to get a place closer to the club as soon as possible. After one training session and one very long return commute back home up the M6, in the players' words, it took him 2 hours breaking all speed limits to do so, Unsworth told his new manager that he felt he'd made a terrible mistake. Gregory, who in his unmistakable style and had unveiled his seemingly ecstatic new signing just a few days earlier, thought it was a wind-up at first. After one appearance in a friendly against Wickham, which Gregory later described as reluctant, Unsworth's mind was made up. Gregory placed the blame firmly at the feet of Mrs. Unsworth's reluctance to give the West Midlands a go, and a now farcical football story had its villain, or not, as the case may be. After completing a switch back to Goodison for a small profit on what Doug Ellis had just forked out to West Ham, the transfer followed Unsworth for the rest of his career. Whenever he returned to Villa Park, he was always greeted with chants with, "Does your missus know you're here?" Villa backfilled the position with a teenage Gareth Barry, who rose to the challenge and then some. James, is David Unsworth the greatest defender Aston Villa sort of never had?
He wasn't that great as a defender. He was all right. He was a decent Premier League level player who could take penalties. The fact that this happened, we see it as funny rather than annoying. Yeah. I mean, at the time, it was like, But yeah, as you say, we buy Steve Watson from Newcastle instead. And also Gareth Barry, who's only 17 in this season, and he plays a whole bunch of games, came through as well. Actually, Villa, we had Lee Hendry as well, who got into the England team based on his performances this season. And so, yeah, he was like, we do that sometimes, Villa. We pick up players who are kind of workman-like journeyman footballers who are just shuffling around. Like it happens now. We had Leander Den Donker in our squad this season, and we've got Jen Badnarek for a bit. All right, it's our turn with him. So we babysit these journeyman players as they move from club to club. Yeah, it's one of those things that Villa have always done. So yeah, and we don't think about things like the fact that when footballers move clubs, they have to move their entire family. And they might have kids in school. There might be family issues that we don't know about. And if a player doesn't think about those things either and makes the rash decision to go to a club that's going to completely ruin his personal life, then this is something that's happened. So I'm glad that it ended as quickly as it did, and it did. He wasn't there miserable for a year, playing like shit and taking up space and costing us money. That would have been worse because. We see footballers as they can just go anywhere, and they can't. It's just not realistic to expect that.
I once saw David Unsworth taking a crap at Belfield.
Was it magnificent?
It was magnificent. I tell you what, big thighs, magnificent thighs. Basically, at Everton at Belfield, if you ever closed the door while you were having a crap, it was fair game. You could throw anything into the cubicle. So every player and coach would have a crap with the door open. I took the wrong turn once because earlier I mentioned that I did postgrad research with the FA. I did have a bit of a career in football. And yeah, I was at Goodison. I needed to go and relieve myself. When I say relieve myself, I needed a poo. I wasn't masturbating in training grounds at that stage. That was to come later.
Well, not initially.
Me and Dion. And I took a wrong turn. In Belfield, and there's David Unsworth reading the Daily Mirror with his magnificent thighs defecating. So anyway, should we move on?
Again, it's not the David Duncan anecdote. I think this has been quite a section. Of the newly promoted sides, Middlesbrough bringing experience with Brian Dean, Gary Pallister, Colin Cooper and Dean Gordon. Forest recruit Nigel Quasi and Neil Shipley in a bid to replace striking Pierre Van Hooijdonk. And Charlton add Neil Redfern, Chris Powell and eventually John Barnes for their maiden Premier League campaign in what could be said bringing in a bit of experience.
Doesn't Neil Redfern get relegated every year for about 5 years in a row? I think it was the law in the Premier League in the late 90s that you can only be relegated if Neil Redfern is playing for your team.
He's got Bradford to come, hasn't he? Yeah.
But also, he's one of those. He's like, Phil Ford, who was at Rochdale, who had 900 appearances. Neil Redfern is right up there for all-time outfield player appearances. So that was his thing. He just went on for years getting people relegated. That was his thing.
And he was a decent player. He was like one of those real in-between players where he always seemed too good for the second tier and maybe not quite good enough for the Premier League. But, he scored quite a few goals, especially for Barnsley.
In the Clinton Morrison limbo.
Yeah. There's sort of a middle ground there where teams like the player version of Norwich. Spurs bring in Tim Sherwood but miss out on Ollie Solskjaer. How different things could have been. While West Ham pick up the newly disgraced Paulo Di Canio for a bargain fee. The recently disgraced John Hartson joined Wimbledon for $7 million after footage of him volleying Isle Berkovic in the face during training effectively went as viral as something can in September '98 because cameras were filming the open training session. Duncan Ferguson presumably becomes the first player with an Everton crest tattooed on him to play for Newcastle United. That's the transfers in 98-99, Don.
Do you want a Duncan Ferguson fact?
Go for it.
Yes.
A Finnish composer wrote what would it be called? It's not a whole symphony. It's like about an 11-minute long musical piece about Duncan Ferguson and about him being in prison. And the night that it premiered, Duncan Ferguson scored for Everton against Manchester United while it was being premiered in Finland.
Wow.
In the Premier League, Duncan Ferguson was scoring for Everton against Manchester United.
That symphony, of course, known for its Jube solo. That was quite a beautiful moment.
You see how we've jumped from masturbating in training grounds to classical music in Scandinavia with such effortless grace.
We're going to come to the goal of the season. Now, this is Premier League goal of the season. I think we will also cover, there are quite a few iconic non-Premier League goals in this season. We will put the link in the description so you can go and see what we were choosing from. This is kind of from a Sky Sports kind of amalgamation of goals. I'm not sure what they've done to the footballs this year because there seems to be a much higher proportion of absolute screamers from outside the box and fewer team goals, which I remember, James, you in particular are more of a fan of. Special mentions for Steve Guppy and Steve Froggatt for absolute thunderbastards and Neil Redfern, who put so much curl on one for Charlton against Wimbledon. Neil Sullivan sort of just leaves it because it's so obviously going wide and in it curls into the corner. But these are, I think, the four, for one reason or another, that are the best from our shortlist. Is it Michael Owen's goal against Newcastle? Fresh from announcing himself to the world in St Etienne with a glorious solo run against Argentina, he sort of recreates it to complete his hat-trick, nicking the ball just inside his own half, getting the better of three Newcastle defenders and putting it beyond the onrushing Shay Given. It's inside 32 minutes as a nation pauses from burning Beckham effigies to marvel at the global icon we've now clearly got on our hands. Or is it Muzzy Izzet against Spurs, who turns a decent clearance from Steve Guppy's free kick into a goal of the season contender by putting it into the top corner on the volley? He sprints away and slides on the floor with his Walker's Crisp sponsor logo showing. Or is it Horacio Carbonari versus Nottingham Forest? Bonus points for it being an 85th minute winner in a local grudge match that all but relegates your rivals, admittedly. But the defender, who was nicknamed Bazooka for his powerful free kicks, almost falls over the ball receiving it before momentarily being inspired by the spirit of Diego Maradona, which is impressive because he won't be dead for another 2 decades. He turns, cuts inside, and then indeed bazookas it into the bottom corner. Or is it the wonderfully named Nwankwo Kanu versus Middlesbrough? A ball in from the right is slightly behind the Nigerian, who doesn't care about things like that, and backheels it while airborne like he's down the park and not scoring Arsenal's 5th of 6 of the afternoon down by the riverside. So, Kanu, Carbonari, is it Michael Owen? There are 4 Premier League goals.
That sounded like a question, then. Is it Michael Owen?
What are you going for, James?
That Michael Owen goal, had Ruud Gullit just taken over as Newcastle manager at that point? Was that the start of the sexy football that he promised and never arrived?
Yeah, and in the Sky preview beforehand, there's just Geordie's obviously walking around everywhere outside the ground with dreadlocks.
Yeah. That is a theme whenever Newcastle get a new manager or owner, isn't it? I was there when they all literally... I remember driving over the Tyne Bridge and just seeing a single bloke just walking along with a tea towel on his head. And that was just... It was sort of a beautiful, culturally inappropriate sight.
He might have been on his way to play a shepherd in the Nativity. You don't know.
And James, this is the thing with Carl. He's always jumping to presumptions like this. Really.
Yeah.
Just an innocent Geordie on his way to play Joseph, and you are honestly making these assumptions.
Can I vote for Dion Dublin's winner against Arsenal purely because of this really odd celebration he does? He lashes the ball in from about 6 yards, and then he does a sort of old man style walk for a bit.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yes. I remember that.
What are you doing? He's in the moment. He's dancing to the dube in his mind.
Marv?
Well, I've got a few things to say. Yeah, the Owen dribble versus Newcastle. So reminiscent of the Argentina goal, like you said. And later on in the season, he tears his hamstring and he's never got that same explosive pace after that. He said it himself, hasn't he? And maybe that hamstring injury was always going to come because of his physiological makeup. We don't know. But like when Rooney held us to ransom in 2004, because we always remember how if he'd have stayed fit in 2004, we win that tournament. I'm pretty sure we'll win it. And he's never the same for England after that. Owen's never the same for England after his injury. And I just feel like we had those two brilliant players in the last 20 odd years, and they lost something quite early on in their careers. And that's my philosophical moment. Two other things to say. I've got no respect for goals like what Carney scored with the flick, because I can do them. I'm not the best player in the world, and you mentioned he did it like as if he was on the park. I could used to be able to do them on the park. So I've got no respect for any goal that's scored that I could do. Okay. I'm just laying my cards on the table there. It was whipped in with pace. All he had to do was angle his heel, and the rest is done for him, Carl. So let's have it right, mate. Okay. But the goal that I choose is, you used the term thunder bastard early on, and I'm a lover of the volley. Muzzy Izzet's thunder bastard is unbelievable. It's a great goal.
Yeah, I mean, there are some great, like Steve Froggatt scores an incredible one on his left foot, like into the top corner. Like there's some absolutely fantastic ones, but Izzet's is on the volley. It's incredible.
Yeah, Guppy's was a goal of significance as well because it was a hammer blow to Chelsea's title aspirations.
Yeah, yes, it was.
That was a goal of some stature as well. But yeah, there were some unbelievable strikes. And actually, I do want to just, as a footnote to what I've said about Carney's goal, I thought Carney was a brilliant player. One absolute breath of fresh air he was. He looked like he couldn't run, but he was quick and strong. He was such an interesting player to watch. I loved him. I thought he was a great player.
He does actually probably score a slightly better goal than this, depending on your opinion, against Spurs, where he receives the ball with his back to goal and just kind of knocks it in the air and over Luke Young's head. And this is, again, this era where Sky have now got like cameras everywhere, showing things in slow motion. One of the most delightful bits about that goal is Luke Young's face as he kind of realizes what the hell has happened. Yeah. And, you know, he's in that kind of, it's a Bergkamp-esque goal really that Carney scores against Spurs, which is also quite a important goal. Okay, so they're the Premier League goals. Let's just mention perhaps one or two iconic goals. James, have you got a favourite from kind of the other games that happened?
Well, look, it's 98-99, so obviously we're going to have to talk about the two iconic late goals in a big final scored by a Manchester team by Kevin Horlock and Paul Dickov in the Division 2 playoff final, where they end up with Manchester City beating Gillingham on penalties. Because honestly, had that not happened, Manchester City might not have been a Premier League team when Abu Dhabi were looking to buy someone. So we don't know what the implications of that goal actually means.
Yeah, I was at a christening that day, and I saw that City were 2-0 down. And I can't remember if we'd just won the treble or it was just before we were going to go. I think it might be the day after the cup final or something like that. And I just remember being so smug, just thinking, they are so shit. They are so... They will never be like us, James. They will never, ever be like us.
I imagine you being at a christening the day of that game is a bit like the christening at the end of The Godfather, where you're being asked if you renounce Satan just as Paul Dickoff's equalising against Gillingham.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Fucking Paul Dickoff. He assumed Nigel Winterburn's stature in that moment, didn't he?
Yeah. Paul Dickoff is, of course, what Dion Dublin was doing in that men's room.
And Ryan Giggs' famous goal in the semi-final, and David Ginola scores a pretty good one at Oakwell as well in the FA Cup.
Can I just say, I went to the first game, the first semi-final against Arsenal, also at Villa 4 days earlier. The drabbest 0-0 you've ever seen. Yeah. And we were going to so many games, and I thought, I didn't just come out of university. I wasn't really earning anything. I thought, I'm not going all the way back down the M6. We'll just watch it on the telly. And what a bad choice that was, wasn't it? To not go to the replay.
Yeah. It seems quite like archaic now to have a replay of that stature at neutral ground like 3-4 days later. And as well, if you think this is before the internet and buying tickets, like the cogs that must go into, I suppose it's all prepped and ready, but to basically sell another match out at that scale 4 days later, incredible.
It wasn't sold out. It wasn't sold out. It wasn't a full house that night. And 4 years, 1995. You know when Roy Keane stamps on Southgate in that replay? Or was that the first game? Anyway, the replay. I was sat in the Holt end with my mate, and there was just seats around us, empty. I think there's only like 28,000 on that the replay of the semi-final in 96, 95. Can't remember.
It was like that during the Euros in 96 as well.
Yeah.
Most of the grounds in the country about half full.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's move on to the managerial changes of this season. Sheffield Wednesday and Everton begin the season with new men in the dugout as Danny Wilson and Walter Smith take charge respectively. It's also a little more crowded on the Anfield bench as Gerard Houllier budges up alongside Roy Evans in a pioneering new managerial setup that won't last long. Rude Houllier.
What a stupid idea that was.
Ridiculous.
Just give Houllier the job. Oh, we don't want to sack Roy Evans because we like him.
Yeah, it was such a weird scenario.
I think it's Wengeritis catching, do you not think? Because actually, again, everyone's trying to follow Arsenal's blueprint. Houllier is a successful coach in France, and I think basically Liverpool are probably feeling already, like most teams were at that point, that they're falling behind.
Yeah, and Spurs get Christian Gross.
Yes, they do.
Weird Swiss man with the train ticket.
Yeah, although yes, that's the main thing that I long for the return of Christian Gross, because was he not a man who just loved going on the tube? He was the manager of Spurs, but just loved travelling on the tube.
He brought his tube ticket to his first press conference, and was pretty successful everywhere except for Tottenham. He always put it down though to the fact that he couldn't bring his assistant over. I think it was like a visa issue or something. But he's basically his long-time collaborator who he worked with at all of his clubs couldn't come to Spurs, and he always put it down to that being the reason.
I could imagine Ange on the Northern Line though, actually, can't you?
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that would. Yeah. Managers on public transport. That feels like an entire new feature we're going to have to explore at some point.
Yeah.
Ruud Gullit promises to bring his brand of sexy football to the Geordie nation, replacing Kenny Dalglish at St James's early in the season, while Christian Gross is on a tube out of Tottenham. David Pleat and Chris Hughton step in for a month until Spurs eventually get their man from Leeds a month later in George Graham, a man I seem to remember having an Arsenal emblem on his driveway, but I can find nothing about that. I wondered if either of you two knew about this. I seem to remember that he was Spurs manager. He got an Arsenal crest in his driveway. But anyway, I think
as soon as Spurs got George Graham as their manager, they became Arsenal's bitches forever.
I'm going to remember this when
it's been 25 years. Still true.
And another former Arsenal hero, David O'Leary, steps up at Ellen Road, but only after a prolonged pursuit of Leicester's Martin O'Neill is spurned. Roy Hodgson leaves Blackburn bottom in November after picking up just 9 points in his first 14 games, to be replaced by Brian Kidd, who finally steps out of Fergie's shadow and in doing so walks out on one of the most successful club seasons ever recorded just as it's getting started. Dave Bassett isn't partying like it's 1999 when he's sacked a week into the new year to be replaced by Ron Atkinson in the most nostalgically 90s managerial change around of the season in the final year of the decade. He kicks things off by sitting in the wrong dugout before a 1-0 home defeat to Arsenal. Big Ron, I mean, there's something that obviously his reputation has been somewhat soured, not much longer after this, actually, as a pundit. He's kind of running out of magic, I think, in the dugout as well, especially in the wrong dugout, isn't he?
Yeah. What's lovely about this clip of Big Ron going into the dugout is that he's in his typical sort of manager's like camel coat type of thing, and the cameras are on him and the photographers are snapping away. He's in the wrong dugout. And you can see the Arsenal subs to his right. And he's not clocked yet, has he?
No.
And he turns to look to the players on his right. And even for a moment, he sort of like acknowledges them as if it's like, are you in the wrong dugout, lads? And then he just ever so nonchalantly goes, yeah, it's me, isn't it?
Yeah. And let's face it, returns to a dugout with a slightly less strong bench sat behind him.
Yeah, it's a really good sign that your time's up as a manager when you're having senior moments like that, isn't it? I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And Joe Kinnear also steps down in March due to health reasons before a game against Sheffield Wednesday in what will actually be Wimbledon's final win of the season. Mick Harford and Terry Burton take the reins for the remainder, overseeing 9 defeats in their final 11 games. Thankfully, Wimbledon have done enough to not quite be dragged into the relegation zone for that. We sadly lost Joe Kinnear recently, definitely a character of the game and particularly of the 90s in the Premier League. How's he remembered by you?
My main Roy Kinnear memory. Joe Kinnear, sorry.
when he took his daughter around that chocolate factory, that was the best bit.
Exactly. He was once on Football Focus, I think, and he kept calling Gabriel Batistuta Batty Toaster. And you know when people in the game are more senior, obviously, and more knowledgeable than the presenter, and the presenter will never pull them up on a pronunciation of a player's name. Mm. But this was quite a long, in-depth chat about the Argentinian forward, and so he called him Batty Toaster 8, 9, 10 times, and he just kept doing it. He wouldn't stop doing it. So God bless him. He did a lot of great things in the game, but I remember him for that.
Yeah. Nobody ever pulled David Pleat up on calling Chimbonda Chimbumba for most of his. I mean, it was literally phonetic. I don't know what was going on there, but
I tell you what, I mean, the sort of increased cosmopolitan nature of the Premier League has brought us many benefits. But I do miss the mad old managers getting foreign players' names wrong for ages trope, which doesn't really happen anymore. And that's a shame.
Such a sad loss. I just have to leave it to my dad to do that.
Joe Kinnear, by the way, I didn't realise his managerial career actually started out in the 80s in Asia with his old teammate Dave Mackay. It does mean that his managerial record reads as the well-trodden path of India, Nepal and Doncaster Rovers. So there you go. Marv, Brian Kidd leaving Old Trafford, we've kind of touched upon it. How destabilising does it feel to Fergie, do you think? Or, I mean, obviously, as we covered, perhaps bringing in... Well, yeah.
He wins the treble. It turns out Brian Kidd was holding him back.
Yeah. And if it wasn't too long ago that, we had dugouts where it was literally just the manager, the assistant manager, and the physio. So, I imagine that United's backroom staff was starting to develop a bit more than that at that stage. But on the 99 documentary on Prime now, I think you do sense that Ferguson was, he's a bit put out by it, suddenly losing your right-hand man. And he's obviously, Ferguson wasn't a training ground coach either. He wasn't a man that was out there taking sessions. So, something had to happen pretty quickly. So it will have destabilised him to an extent. But obviously, he just rang his mate, the Bald Eagle, and nicked his coach, and the rest is history, really, isn't it? So, yeah. But yeah, I was at Blackburn that night. That we didn't send Blackburn down because it was a draw and they've been poor all season. But it was a bit sad, really, because you'd obviously seen him from where he was, and then what United go on to achieve that season, and you see him tumbling down into the next level. I don't think he's even stayed on. Did he leave Blackburn? I can't remember, but
I think soon after.
Yeah, that's how unmemorable it was, But a shame for him, really.
It goes on to City.
Yeah, and Leeds. He was at Leeds for a while.
Yeah,
I suppose I was thinking about it from a Villa point of view. Which backroom member of staff would I be gutted in losing? And it's probably the bloke who looks like Rick Wakeman who does the set pieces. I love him.
I know exactly the guy you mean. Yeah.
Yeah, I just hope Yes don't tour anytime soon because we don't want to lose him.
If that coincides with you getting shit at corners, we'll know what's happened. And as we mentioned, Liverpool pioneer a brave new managerial setup. Former French national coach Gerard Houllier joins as joint manager with Roy Evans. They do get off to a winning start at the Dell, but it doesn't work. Evans leaves in November after 35 years at Anfield. He'd later describe it as an impossible situation. Liverpool actually eventually finished closer on points to bottom side Nottingham Forest than eventual champions Manchester United in 7th. There are better times ahead under Houllier then. So, on to the individual awards of the season. Tottenham's David Ginola is both the Players and Writers Player of the Year. Nicholas Anelka wins Young Player of the Year. Alex Ferguson takes the Manager's Award. The Team of the Year then is goalkeeper Nigel Martin of Leeds for a second year running, Gary Neville at right back, Dennis Irwin at left back, Jaap Stam in his maiden season in England at centre back, alongside Sol Campbell for Spurs. Don't remember that. Midfield is Beckham. Go on. Yeah.
David Seaman concedes 17 goals all season.
Yeah.
And keeps 19 clean sheets, and he's not the best goalkeeper in the league.
No,
right.
Not according to not according to this team.
Not PFA play. This is PFA team, isn't it?
PFA Team of the Year. Yeah.
This is voted by the peers. So whether it's a personal, I don't know.
I think there always was a lot of that. Like Gary Pallister, great player, obviously, but Gary Pallister was in it like about 8 years. Like it was like it's incredible how many times Gary Pallister's in it. So I do think unless he just had a brilliant like Jess Phillips / Kevin Phillips campaign trail to kind of bring everyone's votes together. So yeah, Beckham's in midfield, Ginola on the left, Vieira and Petit are the central pairing. Both double winners the previous season. Neither of them made the PFA Team of the Year last season, losing out to Nicky Butt and David Batty. But Petit and Vieira are this season in the PFA Team of the Year. And it's Dwight Yorke and Nicholas Anelka. So actually, for the first time, the PFA Team of the Year starting to take a slightly more international look.
And even though, Chelsea finished third, but only by 4 points. They lose the same number of games as Man United. None of their players are in the Team of the League, but Spurs, who finished 11th, have 2 players and the Player of the Year. What the hell is going on?
United drew at home to Chelsea that season 1-1, and Chelsea battered us. They absolutely murdered us that night from memory. Yeah, they were a really good side. I remember Poyet just being superb. Yeah, really good side.
And they were kind of always on the coattails of the title without, as I say, up to Christmas, they were like top at Boxing Day and into January. They, much like Villa, obviously Villa dropped off more dramatically. Chelsea really kind of hung in there. But when those two teams kind of really put their foot down in the second half of the season, they were kind of always on the edges of it. And that they lost that 2-goal lead against Leicester that really kind of ended their mathematical hopes. I think Vialli kind of says, yeah, we could still win it if we win our final game and the other two lose theirs like 12-0. We should be fine. But yeah, Chelsea kind of always on the edges of it. Ginola winning Player and Writers Player of the Year for a very average Spurs side. Surely at least one of the treble-winning players has been robbed there, or what? What do we think?
I think, I don't know what the timelines were in terms of when the votes have to be in, but obviously maybe United players split the vote and he came through. He scored that wonder goal at Barnsley. Was it about that time that the votes were going in? We don't know. He was a good player. Let's have it right. He was an excellent player. But it does seem a bit crazy that you can just reel off 5 or 6 United players that you think might have been Player of the Year, especially someone like Yorke, to go to a massive club like that. Obviously, forgive me, James. Obviously, Villa are a huge club in their own right, but it's just a step up. Yeah, it's a step up, and to go there and have the impact that he did on that stage, and then you think, well, he scored a goal in South Yorkshire on a Tuesday night, and that's got him that, has he?
Yeah, well, the thing about Dwight Yorke, can he do it in Barnsley on a Tuesday?
Exactly.
So let's summarise the final season of the millennium then. Manchester United secure their 5th title in 7 seasons in what will be the first leg of a historic treble. Arsenal have to settle for runners-up spot, while Chelsea finished 3rd, their highest finish since 1970. David O'Leary's Leeds are 4th, West Ham continue to improve in 5th, and newly promoted Middlesbrough are the only side to survive, finishing a comfortable 9th. At the bottom of the table, Ron Atkinson can't save Nottingham Forest, who make an immediate return to the First Division, with fellow promoted side Charlton. 1995 champions Blackburn Rovers joined them in relegation, as Brian Kidd reflects on his life choices. The departure of Joe Kinnear combines with Wimbledon's lowest top-flight finish since their promotion more than a decade earlier, finishing 16th in what is the beginnings of the slow and drawn-out death of an entire football club. More on that next season. Manchester United emulate Arsenal's achievement of completing the double with an identical 2-0 win over Newcastle United in the FA Cup final. Teddy Sheringham opens the scoring within 90 seconds of replacing the injured Roy Keane before Paul Scholes finishes the job just after half-time. Spurs lift the rebranded Worthington Cup with Alan Nielsen's last-minute goal enough to beat Leicester 1-0 despite being down to 10 after Justin Edinburgh's red card. And Manchester City secure promotion back to the second tier after a dramatic comeback in the Division 2 playoff final against Gillingham. I'm sure that's the last we'll be hearing about them. Manchester United secure a historic treble in the most dramatic fashion possible, coming from 1-0 down in added time to beat Bayern Munich 2-1. Sheringham is again on the score sheet before Ole Solskjaer writes his name into Old Trafford folklore. Marv, I know you were there at the Nou Camp that night. I mean, children aside, where does that day rank in the best of your life?
I wish I'd not got as pissed. Let's start with that. I was absolutely hammered, and it's one of my big regrets, joking aside, that I wasn't more sober for that game. But it was unbelievable. I might not be able to recollect all of it because of my drunken state, but I remember the feelings. I remember the feelings. It was just that thing of we're still getting our breath back from equalising, and you look down and we're taking a corner. And not, the whole build up to the goal, to the second goal of getting the corner, we're still holding each other, and still it's going to extra time. We're still with a chance, and you look down and we've got a corner. You don't even think we're going to get the second, and then suddenly we've got the second, and it's done, and it's over. And I was just sobbing. My mate said I was just absolutely just sobbing. It was amazing. It was incredible. It was a brilliant night.
Yeah, unbelievable. Absolutely incredible. I had Jim White on the show, a Manchester United fan who was in the press box, and he said that some kind of irate Man United fan had walked down the press box punching the laptop screens of all of the journalists just as he was having to file his final report that was entirely rewritten as well, by the way. That's an incredible story of what was going on, because from him as a Man United fan, also worked in a professional capacity, incredible. So yeah,
well, there's all sorts of little quirky. I mean, that's obviously a violent tale, but there's a story of Lennart Johansson going. From was he going down to the pitch to present the trophy, and then from him leaving the stand to get to the bottom, he was suddenly presenting it to a team that he thought weren't going to win the trophy that night. So
he couldn't work out why. Basically, the Bayern Munich players were inconsolable. They just won the European Cup as far as he was concerned.
Absolutely. And obviously, Samuel Kuffour is a big memory, isn't he? Obviously, I wasn't aware of it at the time, but...
punching the turf, wasn't he?
Yeah. And with the certain camera angles where you see the United fans delirious in the backgrounds, and it's some sporting image, let's say.
Yeah, an incredible night. Elsewhere in UEFA's competitions, Parma lift the UEFA Cup in Moscow with a 3-0 win over Marseille. Villa Park hosts the last ever Cup Winners' Cup final as Lazio defeat Mallorca 2-1 with goals from Nedved and Vieri. Mallorca, by the way, had knocked out reigning champions Chelsea in the semis. They were real underdogs that season. James, I imagine you've enjoyed watching Villa in the Conference League this season, going deep into the latter stages. It felt like the Conference League feels like it's got that same bonkers spirit that the Cup Winners' Cup used to have. I mean, is that? Do you agree? What was it like to experience it?
Yeah, it's probably the closest thing we've got to that now. It's the third tier European competition, and it was great to be in it because we scraped into it pretty much on the last day of the season before. So just to be in it was good, and we were doing all right, and we should have won it because we were the richest team in the competition, so we should have won it, but by the end of the season, with the amount of injuries that Villa had, they were just knackered. They were the walking wounded for the last 4 or 5 weeks of that season. And Olympiacos were really good. That striker who scored 5 of the goals against us, he's not going to be there much longer. And, so, they were just much better than we were. But we're playing against teams like Ajax and Lille and Olympiacos, who've been in Europe pretty much every season for the last 20 years, and we haven't. So, it's a learning experience for us, and we've got to learn very quickly because we're in the stupid multi-league Champions League thing next year with 35 other teams. So,
Yeah, that is going to be. And
we're not allowed to buy anyone, so we're going to hope Ross Barkley joins us and turns out to be bloody Pele.
It'd be a good signing, I think. It'd be a good signing.
We need cover for Kamara, who just gets injured a lot. So hopefully he can do that job.
Some of the bigger news stories during this season. The Euro is launched across much of the EU, but not the UK. England manager Glenn Hoddle is dismissed a few days after controversial comments about disabled people are published by The Times. The minimum wage is introduced in the UK at £3.60 an hour. And Crime Watch presenter Jill Dando is shot dead on her Fulham doorstep in one of the 90s most shocking and high-profile murder cases.
Keep it light, though, eh?
Yeah, that's it. Finish on a light one. At the cinema in 1998.
I did think that when I saw that happen that year. I thought, there's no way he'll mention that.
We've gone for it.
He's gone for it. All angles are being covered. Actually, it's quite a smattering of tragedy in this episode, isn't there? There's Santa losing a leg. There's the death of a news presenter. Let's not dwell.
Yeah, no. At the cinema in 1998, we were watching There's Something About Mary, Saving Private Ryan, Armageddon and Godzilla, but those four movies combined couldn't match the box office pull of Titanic. In the 1998 music charts, you'll find Run DMC and Jason Nevin's It's Like That, Leanne Rimes' How Do I Live, and Chocolate Salty Balls by Chef in the top 10 best-selling songs of the year. Quick quiz. Celine Dion's My Heart Will Go On is the second best-selling single of the year in the UK, behind which other North American songstress making a career comeback? In 1998, the top-selling song of the year. It's not Celine Dion.
Share, Believe. Indeed it is. And that brings to a close the 1998-99 season.
Can we just do in any other business? Ed De Hoy was the most Dutch-looking man I've ever seen. That's it. Really.
That's it.
And can I just say, and I'm not here to gloat. I'm just pointing out a statistic. The season that has just finished, 2023/24, is the first time that Aston Villa have finished ahead of Manchester United in the Premier League era.
There you go. You see, this is why
it may well be the only time that happens ever.
So in about 15 years' time, when I reach this season on the podcast, I'm going to get you both back on and you'll be able to do that glow. So, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me once again. Marv, what have you got coming up at the moment? What's going on? And also, give us a plug for your podcast that you mentioned earlier.
Well, I'll be honest, Carl. I've got nothing going on at the moment. I've literally nothing going on. For a third time, nothing going on. But the podcast that we've got, it's called Smith Must Score, FA Cup Nostalgia Podcast. We had the likes of Joe Royle, Steve Perryman, Andy Thorne. We had some really great guests, and it was some really, really good chats. We keep talking about maybe re-energizing it and it coming back, but we sort of felt like when we got Dave Bennett as a guest, that was the episode that killed the podcast. Yeah, you don't really move on from that, do you? As an FA Cup Nostalgia podcast. So Steve McKenzie might be the only one that could come back, because we always talk about how his extra set of a volley in the replay, which is the best FA Cup final goal that no one ever talks about.
Okay,
that could be the basis for it coming back. But yeah, Smith Must Score. That's what it's called.
Okay, all right, brilliant. And James, last time you were on, we were talking about the World Cup of World Cup podcast, but now what's your current one going on at the moment called?
It's called the World Cup of Euros, where myself and fellow comedian and football fan Paul Savage deep dive every Euros tournament there has been since 1960 in order to find out which one is the best. So we've just been going through all the Euros and finding out what happened to all the squad players, and looking for the little quirky bits of nonsense. We've been working on that. So that's going to be an entire series that'll stand alone. The World Cup of World Cups is still available. If you haven't listened to it yet, we do the same thing, but with the World Cup, and it's very dense in terms of its content. There's a lot in it, but you can find it wherever you get your podcasts from.
On brand for this episode, actually, I've just realised the episode I did with you was World Cup 98. So some of the similar themes. Yeah. So a deeply nostalgic time at this period, certainly in my life as well. So yeah, very well worth. If you enjoyed this podcast, you're going to absolutely love that podcast. It is there's so much stuff in there. So, gentlemen, thank you very much indeed. It's been a pleasure to catch up with you both. That's 92-93. We've done 98-99. So another 6 years' time. 05-06, get you back?
Yeah.
Non-committal.
To talk about Chelsea winning the league?
Yeah. It's going to be
when Mourinho was in his pomp. No, yeah. I'll skip that one.
Thank you both. I'll see you soon. So that was Marv and James. What fantastic guests. Just great trivia, great anecdotes. Marv was home and away for Man United that season. What a season to have been at so many of those games. A really, really fun episode. I really enjoyed that. 98-99. I loved that season, and hopefully we've done it justice. So I hope you really enjoyed that. The vote for the Premier League's greatest Cameroonian is now live over on X. I'll have to reveal the results next series, but you can go and vote now. The lads were unanimous in voting for Lauren. You may agree, you may not. Go and place your vote now on X at WFBA Pod on X. All of the links you need, as ever, are in the description for this show. So this is the end of season 3. We'll pick back up in season 4 at the 99-2000 season, in our season by season. As far as the all-time Premier League table is concerned, we're up to about 42nd there, which I think is roughly Brentford, who keep climbing that table. So we'll cover them and various other teams that are just outside that top 40. And I hope to have some more incredible guests from the world of football on this show, talking all about their favourite memories. Still not heard back from Saido Berahino, but, you know, fingers crossed. I've got some great guests lined up already, though. Really, really looking forward to having them on. So I'll be busy recording them over the summer. And hopefully, who knows, we may have a victorious England team to celebrate and discuss in a future episode some way down the line. Over that summer period, obviously, if you're new to the show, there is a big archive of shows. Clive Tildesley and Henry Winter, if you particularly enjoyed this season, they both have quite a lot to say about Manchester United's 1999 win. So they are great episodes to go back to. But as ever, I would really, really appreciate it if you share the show, if you are subscribing and leaving reviews. It helps me discover more listeners. It is a much appreciated thing when a new review pops up or people share the show. So thank you. If that's something that you've done, I really appreciate it. And if you enjoy this, please keep sharing it. But until the autumn, that's it from me. Hopefully you have enjoyed what we've done this season, and I've got lots more in the pipeline. So I'll be back, fingers crossed, in the autumn. Until then, enjoy the Euros, enjoy Premier League past in the archive of this show. I'll see you back here in a few months' time. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you very much for listening. See you soon.